Hey, y'all, welcome back. I have a special guest with me, Savannah. Savannah, you have lots of titles. So tell me, what do you do now?
Hi, Marci. Thanks for having me. My name's Savannah Eldridge. I am the founder of Be Frank for Justice, and I also am the lead organizer for the Abolish Slavery National Network, which is a national network fighting to end slavery in practice by amending constitutions across the country. I also co-founded the Coalition to Abolish Slavery Texas, along with David Johnson. And I'm actually on the steering committee for the Statewide Leadership Council. And I've seen all the great work that SLC has been doing, but some of my other works have really commanded some of my time. So I haven't been able to be as present as I'd hoped with SLC, but always excited about the work that the team is doing.
Thanks, Savannah. And that's how I know you, because I'm a member of this Texas Statewide Leadership Council as well. And I actually was thumbing through Facebook yesterday, and I came upon a really interesting and important conversation that you were having. And it was, I think that the title said Commemorating Juneteenth. And so can you tell us about that? Because you are a member of an organization to abolish, or a co-founder of an organization to abolish slavery. And I would think that a lot of the population here in the United States think that that's already happened. They think that the 13th Amendment already abolished slavery. Can you tell us about that?
Right. So with my work with the Abolish Slavery National Network, really that's what it's about. And also in trying to imagine what that would look like here in Texas, we started doing the same work here in Texas. And I'll just give you a little bit of the backstory about how I got involved, because I feel like that centers why I do this work. And so in getting in this CJ space, my brother is serving life in prison right now. And I have my younger brother, and I have an older brother who's serving time in Oklahoma. So as an advocate, I started looking at, what space do I fit in as someone who's never been incarcerated, but still wanting to make real change for the people who are incarcerated. So I started doing advocacy work, organizing rallies, and just really trying to raise awareness for people who may not be centered in this work, but wanted to know how to do more. And I organized a rally in Huntsville. It was a freedom and justice rally. It was back in 2020. And in that rally, one of the inside organizers in Mississippi reached out to me through correspondence and asked for help, because they were organizing what they called Free the 13th, which was a national inside-outside movement to raise awareness about the 13th Amendment exception clause, which says slavery and involuntary servitude are prohibited except for those who have been duly convicted of a crime in the United States. And I want to highlight that, the work that ASNN is doing, we are not the originators of this work, right? We're not the originators of this movement. There have been several other individuals and organizations that are doing this very similar work. However, in the way we are organizing, in a way that helps people understand, right, what slavery looks like today, because I think that's the big disconnect sometimes is, when we think about slavery and the 13th Amendment in particular, and thinking about the exception, like what does an exception for slavery look like, and what does slavery look like today? So for me, it was very important to me that the inside people were reaching out for help, because we really need to center those who are closest to the problem, right? And so not just families that are impacted, not just formerly incarcerated individuals, but, what does it look like for people who are currently incarcerated, currently in the belly of the beast, and needing relief from some of these retaliatory practices, and really not centering on compensation, but what does relief look like for someone who doesn't have any, right? And so the Abolish Slavery National Network, we were founded in August 28th, 2020, with the goal, again, of amending constitutional slavery and therein ending slavery in practice. And our coalition partners, Worth Rises, are leading the federal campaign. And Jorge Renaud, who is a well-known advocate here in Texas, is one of the steering committee members for the federal campaign. And so he drives and centers most of the federal work here in Texas and leads that. And so I think it's really important, first and foremost, like you said, people don't know that this is a problem. David and I went on, I guess you could say, a statewide education campaign, and SLC was a very huge part of that because we were organizing visioning sessions across the state. And I was fortunate enough that Maggie allowed me to make this part of the conversation. And that's how CAST started. And we pretty much centered our conversation about, what does slavery look like in Texas, and what would it look like for us to end slavery? And so a lot of this organizing work centers on education. And as you said, we need education and we need data. And that's been two of the hardest parts, because I don't think there's a shortage of stories to tell, but the hardest part is gathering the data because of how hard it is to get the paperwork and things from the entities or the agencies. Like, how can we gather this data in a way that shows that, these are the types of roles that incarcerated individuals are playing, and these are some of the types of retributions that they're facing. I don't want to say retaliation, but retributions that they're facing because either they refuse to work or sometimes they're unable to perform the jobs. Because we also know that there's not any real ongoing assessments for whether or not people can carry out some of the jobs that they're being asked to do in the prisons.
Savannah, so some of the things that you were discussing at these visioning sessions and spreading awareness, let's kind of start there. What does slavery in Texas look like today?
One of the things when we founded CAST, we gathered information and working with people, really great investigative reporters like Michael Barajas, who had already been doing this work when we started actually trying to gather the information. And so what we found was because of the way the prison industrial complex works and the way that they shut out who can even buy goods and services that are produced by incarcerated individuals, the first step was to take a look at who's buying things. Who are the people that are spending money on this work? And what the data shows is that the majority of our state agencies, like our school systems, our elementary school systems, our colleges, of course, the courthouses. We know that the majority of our courthouse furniture is produced by incarcerated workers. Even the Capitol, right? The Capitol, the incarcerated workers helped build the Capitol. And so, and you can contest to this. There's everything from soap to graphics, fences, agricultural things. And one of the things I'll say, not to get too far, of course, but I went to a summit where the TDCJ was providing information about the goods and the services that they provide and the different work programs for incarcerated workers. And one of the pamphlets that I received had the agricultural, the MAL program, the manufacturing and agricultural program. And on there, it actually detailed how many workers it takes, actual staff and incarcerated workers, to maintain these programs. And I'm looking at that as somebody doing this work, wow, it makes dollars and cents, right? And it really details how this is incentivized, right? The work of incarcerated workers is incentivized. We know that TCI makes over $70 million annually from the work of those, specifically in TDCJ. So TCI is Texas Correctional Industry, just to clarify that. But Texas Correctional Industries benefits and makes and nets over $70 million annually from the work of incarcerated workers. And not only are we hoping to see that folks are compensated and incentivized for their work, but we're also hoping that folks do not face any retaliation for being unable to perform some of those tasks as well.
Thank you for that, Savannah. How do you envision the operation happening with the abolishment of slavery in completion, right? What does that look like for us?
So I think, and let me just say, because I didn't say this earlier, I'm sorry, I didn't totally answer the question. So the webinar that you stumbled upon was commemorating Juneteenth. And it's really important in doing this work that we try to help people understand where this intersects with other campaigns, right? Because it's really important. I think that if you're doing any type of campaign for the incarcerated population, there's no way that you would not support something that is essentially going to restore their rights, if nothing else, aside from labor and wages. We are hoping to restore the rights of incarcerated workers by naming that they have the basic and inalienable rights, just like every other worker, a community worker who contributes to society. It's really important for people to understand that the transition of power is the key component in helping people understand what this looks like, in that the warehousing and owning of bodies only transferred from private ownerships to then governmental or state-sanctioned slavery. So slavery did not end, just the change was in who could actually hold people in bondage. And we see that today as the carceral system continues to grow. There's been no shortage of workers. And in fact, in Texas, with these excessive sentencing, one could argue that again, it's almost an incentive to keep people working, keep people employed, if you will, and keep the prisons going. And we talk a lot about the staffing shortage as well, but imagine what that would look like if incarcerated workers so chose to stop working. The prisons could not function and they would fall. But what we also know is that most incarcerated people do want to work, and we're not trying to remove educational services or remove work programs, because we understand that it is important for people to still be able to work, to be educated, because it's a part of their rehabilitation. But what this bill is proposing to do is name that the state should not be wielding its power over people in order to make money.
You talked about the power or the ownership moving from slave owners, the power transferred then to the state, because the 13th Amendment was written with that clause saying, if slavery, it's over, slavery's abolished, unless you commit a crime. So what I know, and Savannah, I never heard of this before in my life. I got out of prison a year after I got out. I started advocacy work and started entering these spaces, and I started Googling and learning. And I just was so astonished that, first of all, everybody doesn't know this. Like, I clearly remember being in elementary school, learning about the 13th Amendment, learning about the Civil War and all of those things, and thinking, man, yeah, we really messed up. We really hurt a lot of people, but we don't do it anymore. And I remember thinking that very clearly. So what I've learned, and so I want you to just enhance on this, is that the 13th Amendment was written, and then they thought, well, we still need this free labor. And they wrote all of these laws that were almost impossible for freed slaves to follow. And then they arrested them. And then it was legal for them to enslave them again. Is that kind of the shortest rundown of it?
Yes. So after the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865, and let me just explain also. So when the 13th Amendment was ratified, of course, it only took a certain number of states in order to ratify that constitutional amendment, right? Texas was not one of those states that contributed to the ratification of the 13th Amendment. So the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865. Texas did not ratify the 13th Amendment until 1870. And so I think that's really important to name to Texans that, we are always late, what I feel, when it comes to taking a look at what it means to have freedom for everybody. And there's a saying like, when you study long, like you really study wrong. And I don't think that's the case in this situation. There was a state convening in Texas where the conversation was simply, well, the 13th Amendment was ratified and we'll just defer to the 13th Amendment, right? So we don't need to make any changes in our state in order to do so. However, by the end of the Civil War, there was a bargaining of sorts. And this is one of those bargaining chips was, well, if you you can rejoin the Union, but you've got to ratify the 13th Amendment. And that's how they made it palatable for some of the Southern states to do so, was that, if you ratify the 13th Amendment, we'll give you land, we'll give you, all these things, you'll be able to rejoin the Union. And that's one of the conversations I think that, that people don't have too often, is that, and looking at like, yes, the 13th Amendment was ratified, but which states actually contributed to the freedom of their citizens? We didn't. And we still aren't, right? And so once the 13th Amendment was ratified and the exception clause included, there were laws that were passed to continue to incarcerate African Americans so that they would be available for free labor. So they were labor, excuse me. So there were vagrancy laws that would pretty much criminalize people who had nowhere to go, who, after 400 years of enslavement and living on a plantation, had no housing, right? They had nowhere to go, and no real sense of how to earn wages, because there were no resources given to them after slavery was ended. So there were many people who were arrested for vagrancy laws. They were arrested for Black codes, and their children's who were orphaned because of their arrests then were leased into that very same system. And also convict leasing. So, and we talked about this yesterday, convict leasing, where individuals were pretty much sold to corporations to do work and pretty much worked to death in uninhabitable conditions, and then just traded out like animals and livestock. And I learned about convict leasing and researching about the Sugarland 95, which was mentioned yesterday. And they're still fighting to get that site memorialized for those 95 individuals who were dug up in Sugarland. And so from a historical context, we can see that after the Civil War and these very detrimental laws were passed in order to keep the economic wheelhouse of slavery going, that we are still, this system is still trying to make a way for people to contribute and not get anything back. And I feel like, and I don't feel like the statistics show that. I think when looking at what it means to compensate incarcerated workers, many people feel like you do the crime, you do the time. So it's just a really easier solution. And I like that you mentioned yesterday that more races need to have an understanding of this, because although the 13th Amendment was intended to keep African Americans enslaved, we have to think about the people of the lower socioeconomic status and Latinos and other races and classes of people who are stuck in this very same system today because of the way our criminal injustice system and our prison industrial complex is functioning today. And I also want to highlight, you know, a lot of people say this should be a no-brainer, right? It really should. But I can tell you, in doing this work for the past 3 years, there is a lot of opposition. There's a lot of resistance, and I can speak specifically to that in Texas, but also in other states. Politicians don't even want to have this conversation. And when they do, I think the easiest argument would be, well, we can't, and it was said in California, we can't afford this, right? So we can't afford to abolish slavery. But what I will say is that at least they're having a conversation in California. Unfortunately, in Texas, in our chambers, it's not really happened in that way yet. And so I'm really hoping that we can galvanize the community and raise awareness so that people can encourage their legislators to have this conversation, to take a look at what it really looks like to end slavery absolutely in the state.
And the way we do that, like with similar to any change, is to have conversations like this, to keep it at the forefront of people's minds and brains. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you today. I want to really quickly, you mentioned the Sugarland 95. Now, Sugarland at Sugarland in Sugarland, Texas, is one of the oldest Texas prisons. And there was a grave site found with a mass grave, 95 bodies. Can you tell us about that?
I had found out about Sugarland 95, and I was just researching about the founder of the organization, and I didn't know that Jay Jenkins with TCJE was actually the president at that time. So I reached out to them and to try to learn more about, you know, this work. And so when the Sugarland 95 were discovered, what I found was that there was a power struggle of sorts between who owned that land, because the land was sitting on a school. It was sitting on the school system, or the school district had bought the land. And so the Convict Leasing and Labor Project are still in an active, and there's another organization, I'm not really sure the name of it, but they are actively trying to memorialize that land for those that were found, who actually were victims of the convict leasing and labor era, the convict leasing era, excuse me, and were buried there in a mass grave at it was the Ellis camp at the time. And so I hadn't worked directly with CLLP on that, but when I was doing my research for CAST, it was one of the things that I had researched and found. And actually, our very first rally was there in Fort Bend County. And it was actually in Missouri City. We didn't do it in Sugarland, but we did it in Missouri City because we were hoping to get more support from the elected officials. And so we did have our very first event for CAST, the Coalition to Abolish Slavery, like our kickoff there in Fort Bend County, with hopes that because this conversation was already happening in that county, that we would be able to garner more support for our statewide action that was happening, or starting rather.
Savannah, you've given us so much good information, and we appreciate you very much. How do we get involved? How can we get a hold of CAST and these kind of organizations?
So CAST is on Facebook, the Coalition to Abolish Slavery Texas. And we also have a Instagram at CASTTX. We have a website, abolishslaverytx.org, for information about the national work. If you're not in Texas and you want to get involved, you can reach out to the Abolish Slavery National Network. It's www.abolishslavery.us. And ASNN is on Twitter and all the socials. We are at ASNN, that's our handle. right now. I just wanted to give a quick statistic about how fast this movement is growing. So since Colorado amended their state constitution, and after their second try, there have been 7 states total that have amended their constitution to name that slavery and or involuntary servitude are prohibited. Rhode Island already, they didn't have an exception. So the total number of states is 8, but there are 7 states that have been able to amend their constitution to abolish slavery to date. And that was coming off the heels of the Freedom 5 last year, where we were able to do so in 4 states. So I'm hoping that Texas will join the ranks of states that name that we will not tolerate and we will not accept the enslavement of any person in our state. And I'm hoping that the rest of the Texas citizens join us in this work, advocacy, the rest of the organizers, because we have an upstream fight ahead of us.
It is a battle, but it's a worthwhile one for certain. And I'm excited to see where this movement goes and get a little more active myself. I'm going to make sure and put all the information that Savannah told us in the description of this video with the links, so you guys can hop on those links and check everything out for yourself, do some investigating. Don't trust what we're saying. Look up the information yourself, and we'd love to have you get involved. Savannah, thank you so much for your time on a Sunday morning of all things.
Thank you, Marci, for having me.